Hi everyone. So faith and science is the topic we've chosen for our Lent talks this year, but I have to confess that I don't know very much about science. I probably did when I was in medical school, but that was a while ago. So I thought I'd take us into the territory that I am familiar with, and that is the world of science fiction. And if you're thinking, oh no, not science fiction, then I'm sorry about that. But I hope I can persuade you a little of its worth as a genre in the next 10 minutes. So David asked me late on Friday for a catchy title, and on the spur of the moment, I said, is Jesus a superhero? Which is a bit naff, so apologies for that, but we will get on to superheroes in a little bit. So science fiction, a little bit like popular music, which I also love, by the way, is often written off as being rubbish, and some of it is rubbish, but I love it. For me, it's not just a guilty pleasure. I actually love it and I think it's good. As a child, I loved the adventure of Star Wars, the utopia of Star Trek, and the intricate world building of things like the Dune novels. And while my friends had boy bands on their walls, I had spaceships and Godzilla on mine. And I actually do speak a little bit of Klingon. And I think science fiction actually has a lot to offer people of faith, as well as just being really fun. It's a genre that is bold in every way, not just in its ridiculous plots and kaleidoscopic imagery, but it's also bold in asking big philosophical questions about existence and challenging us about our own humanity, boldly going where no one has gone before. Just as in the Bible and Christian tradition, stories and parables have illumined greater truths to us, so it is with science fiction also. So stories about aliens often, I think, are about what it is to be human. And stories about monsters are as old as time, that dragons and leviathans have always been part of the myths that we have told ourselves. And I love monster stories because I think they confront our fears and reveal what we are really afraid of and ask us what we are willing to do to keep safe or protect our loved ones. Like zombies, I think, are about our fear of losing control of our urges and our basest desires being revealed. And stories about aliens and shapeshifters often reveal our fear of strangers and our trust in others being misplaced. So science fiction often looks to the future, and in doing so, it usually presumes that humanity will either be doing surprisingly well or very, very badly. So Star Trek is concerned with the former. It imagines a future utopia, actually not that far in the future, but where humanity has basically solved all the petty problems we have now, like poverty and disease and division and climate change, and we have peacefully united the galaxy. So it's pretty wild, and like people moan that the aliens are unrealistic, but like that's quite crazy. But the interesting challenge for people of faith is that this future has also left behind religion. Why is it, we should ask ourselves, that when people imagine a civilized future, it is not one founded on faith or even one that allows room for it? I think that faith is something that calls us forward as a society to a greater dignity, compassion, and reconciliation. But is that something that we are not managing to communicate to society as a whole? On the other end of the spectrum, there are things like Judge Dredd, Mad Max, or The Handmaid's Tale, which imagine that society has completely collapsed due to misuse of power or scarcity of resources. and humans have reverted back to our warring tribal ways. And people are sometimes very cool, but also terrible. And those films can be pretty fun, to me anyway, but they also offer a bit of a sage warning about what we could be capable of. I love an apocalypse, and I especially love it at the moment because seeing a world in which most of humanity have been eaten by vampires makes what we're going through seem not that bad. But I also love the ethical challenges of survival. Does it matter just that we live to see another day? Or does it also matter what sort of people we would become in doing so and what we're willing to sacrifice? And the topic of sacrifice brings me round to talking about what I said I was going to talk about in the title of the video, which is Jesus and superheroes. Science fiction loves a Christ figure. I think stories and fiction in general love a Christ figure and a narrative of salvation, but sci-fi really does it to the max because it can. And I think that's not really surprising. The Jesus story has been with us as a culture for a long time now. And even those who don't profess faith in God are still shaped somewhat by the influence that this story has had on our society. And also, one of the most compelling arguments for Christianity is that it fits the shape of the human heart. As St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. I believe that people are looking for the face of God in those they look to save them, even if they don't know that that's what they're doing. It's no accident that we are moved by stories of self-sacrifice, hope, salvation, and redemption, because these are the story that we have written on the very core of our being. Some science fiction Christ figures are very obvious and deliberate, like Aslan the lion, or Frodo, the innocent one who makes the journey into a place of almost certain death to rid the world of a great evil. Others are a little less deliberate, but perhaps no less obvious. Science fiction has a whole subgenre dedicated to the ones who have the power to save us, and that is superheroes. I think superheroes are worth the time of people of faith, partly because superhero stories are really great. But also I think they're a really interesting illustration of who and what we look to save us. On the one hand, could superhero stories fit the shape of the gospel and illuminate it to us a little more? Maybe. Or do they reveal the very worst of our temptation to fashion God into our own image? I think it is a bit of both. And so I'm going to try to answer the question that I rashly set out in my title. Is Jesus a superhero? And I realised that this is a bit of a silly, annoying question, and I was definitely annoyed by it as a young person. We had these pastors that would come into school and they would make wild claims like Jesus is better than Superman, he's the best superhero. And this annoyed me for two reasons. Firstly, I thought they were wrong. Like, Jesus could give you eternal life, but he didn't fire lasers out of his eyes, did he? These things are not comparable. Like, they're both good. And secondly, I really liked superheroes, although like not Superman, because he's one of my least favourites, and that was usually who they were comparing Jesus to. But they would often be just kind of riding roughshod over something that was quite precious to me and that I was very well informed about. So I just didn't take their opinions very seriously. So I don't think that Jesus is a superhero or should really be compared to one. and this is why. And I'm using Superman as an example here because superheroes are actually very diverse, and some are much more Christ-like than others. So the first reason is that Jesus is not a space alien. Superman is a magic space alien from the planet Krypton who just happens to look like a human and pretends to be one. And one of the things that the church has held to be really important since its earliest days is that Jesus was a fully human person and also fully God. And it is a heresy to say that Jesus only seemed human but wasn't really. Whereas Jesus understands us and is alongside us in our struggles, Superman is always just puzzled by humanity, and he can't understand us because he is not one of us. Reason number 2, Jesus doesn't magically fix things. Not in the same way as Superman does anyway. So if I fall off a building, Jesus is probably not going to fly down and catch me. Jesus is at work in the world, but not usually exactly like that, like no lasers. Reason number 3, Superman doesn't make disciples. He has fans. Lots of superheroes have fans. But he doesn't win people to his cause or invite them to be super like him or draw them into his mission. Whereas Jesus asks us to imitate him and empowers us to do it. Reason number 4. I don't even know what Superman's mission is. Superman does not change the world or challenge the status quo. He's just fighting fires, solving problems, and sometimes quite big problems, like there's an asteroid headed for Earth. But still. And I said that I didn't like Superman, and this is why. Firstly, he's no fun. He's kind of sanctimonious, and the other superheroes don't like him either. It's not just me. But I also think that his morality is really dubious. Superman is like the Immanuel Kant of superheroes. He always hands the criminals over to the authorities because he thinks it's the right thing to do in all circumstances, even though he knows the authorities will do the wrong thing with them. And Wonder Woman actually calls him out on this all the time. But Jesus, unlike Superman, does want to challenge the status quo. A lot of what he said and did was about challenging those in power, lifting up the poor and lowly so that the world might change to become more peaceful and just. So reason number 5, this is my last reason you'll be glad to hear. Jesus is not like Superman because the world is not like a superhero film, which sounds obvious. But is it? This is about the myth of redemptive violence. And redemptive violence is the idea that violence like war, for example, can save us, can redeem us. And it's a myth, it's a lie. Superhero films tell us a version of this lie. They say that humanity is saved in big battles where the goodies defeat the baddies. And this lie is as old as time. It's as old as the Babylonian creation stories where the earth was created in a giant battle of monsters, which is a great idea for a science fiction movie, but a terrible account of our existence. Humans have always been captivated by the idea that violence will fix things, that it's not nice, but it's a means to an end and a way to achieve peace. And sometimes it's as if we actually believe what's happening in superhero films could be real life. It is very fun in a film, a big battle in the sky and stuff being blown up everywhere. Like, nobody wants to see a superhero film where they solve things by talking, do they? But things that, for example, Iron Man would do are not very good, like foreign policy for a government. And I wouldn't want the police to deal with muggers in the same way that Batman does, because he just like punches them and threatens them. I think the Christian conviction is that violence doesn't work. It might seem like it's solving a problem, but it won't ultimately make the world any better. Violence seems like a quick fix, but it's not. It's making a different problem. We believe that ultimately violence will not make the world any better or save humanity. And Jesus shows us that that only happens through costly generosity, acts of transparent kindness, self-sacrifice, and learning to depend on each other. And so that's why I think Jesus is not a superhero, but I still like superheroes. I think there are superheroes who actually are much more Christ-like than Superman. And if you're interested at all in that, you can ask me in the Q&A at 4 o'clock. But I would also like to know what you think. Does science fiction or fiction in general offer us a means of contemplating the truths of what we believe? Or is it all just nonsense? See you later.